This video is a PowerPoint presentation of John Donne's short poem, Hero and Leander. Hello class. I want to use today's video to provide you background information on John Donne's poem, Hero and Leander. The poem's not long, but understanding it does require knowing some historical information that would have been relevant to John Donne and his audience. Let's begin by looking at the text of Donne's poem, which we can see in this slide. I will read it to you. Both robbed of air, we both lie in one ground, both whom one fire had burnt, one water drowned. As I said, it's not a long poem, but if you understand the poem's context, you can see that Donne is able to do a lot with just these few words. The first thing that you need to know is that John Donne was a poet who lived in England during the late 16th and early 17th century. This makes him a close contemporary of William Shakespeare. This portrait of Donne presents him in a hat and costume that was typical of Elizabethan courtiers. His long stare helps portray him as a deep thinker. Though we don't know the exact date of this portrait, we believe it was painted sometime close to the poem's creation in the 1590s. One interesting thing about Donne's career as a poet is that he rarely had his poems published in commercially printed books. Instead, friends and associates of Donne would circulate his writing by sharing handwritten manuscripts with one another. This is an image of one such manuscript. Notice the poem is presented in cursive script rather than in a printed text, as would be the case in a commercially printed work. The fact that Donne's poems were circulated through manuscript meant he had a more selective audience than might otherwise be expected of a poet of that era. Because Donne thought of himself as writing for a small selective group, he believed that his writing catered to an audience that would be more knowledgeable of classical and Christian themes that are in his poems. Donne understands, therefore, that he can be subtle and still expect his readers to follow his hints. He doesn't need to hit his reader over the head with his themes. One of the contexts that Donne would have expected his readers to know is the classical story of the lovers Hero and Leander. The story comes from Greek mythology. Classical stories from Greek myths were very popular in Donne's time. In the myth, Hero, a priestess of the goddess Aphrodite, meets a handsome young man named Leander. Against societal conventions of her priesthood, she agrees to be his lover. The only problem is that Leander lives across the Hellespont, the body of water that separates the European part of what we call Turkey with the Asian part of Turkey. The Hellespont is the narrow strait pictured here in this map of northeastern Turkey. The European portion of Turkey is to the northeast, or the top left corner of the map. The Asian portion of Turkey is to the southwest, or the bottom right. The Hellespont is the narrow body of water running between the two land masses. To be together, the two lovers hatched a plan. Each night, Hero would light a lantern in her window to the northern side of the strait. Here's an image of Hero lighting the lantern to lead Leander to her. With the lantern guiding him, Hero would swim across the channel to be with Hero. One night, a storm blew out Hero's lantern. Not seeing the light, Leander got lost in the storm and he drowned. The next morning, Hero saw Leander's body washed up on the shore. This painting by Jean-Joseph Taillison is a portrait of Hero's grief. We see her weeping over the dying body of her lover. In her sadness, she threw herself out of her own window. Then she also died from drowning. If we look once again at Donne's poem, we can start to make sense of some of his language. Both robbed of air, we both lie in one ground, both whom one fire had burnt, one water drowned. In a brief 2 lines, Donne offers a witty retelling of the original myth. Hopefully you can see some of the elements of the story in the poem now. The water might refer to the Hellespont, in which both lovers drowned. The fire might refer to the lantern that betrays Leander in his swim across the water. It might also refer to the lovers' shared passion. As both drowned lovers can't breathe in water, they are both robbed of air. After death, they are buried in the same ground. You might have also noticed that Donne's poem refers to the classical idea of the 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. Once upon a time in ancient Greece, it was believed that these were the 4 basic elements that made up the universe. But like other classical ideas, Christian thinkers in the Renaissance updated the idea of the elements to better describe the world in a way that accommodated with their religious views. We can see evidence of the Christianization of the 4 elements when we look at this image from the year 1482. In this picture, Christ is seen balancing on a globe divided into 4 sections. At the same time, he holds the elements, air, earth, fire, and water, in balance. This image coincides with the Renaissance Christian belief that it is only God's love that held the antithetical elements of the material world in balance. The idea just seemed logical to them. Without Christ, creation would dissolve into a batch of warm, airy mud. Let's look at Donne's text one last time. Both robbed of air, we both lie in one ground, both whom one fire had burnt, one water drowned. Donne's use of the elements is a way his epigram tries to invoke an idea of coexisting oppositions. Just as the poem is located geographically between the 2 worlds of Europe and Asia, the references to the elements simultaneously refer to the 4 elements of the material world, but also the spiritual world of Christ. For a Christian poet like Donne, the expression of this spiritual material opposition is another way of invoking the Christian Renaissance idea of the world around them, a world bound together by Christ's spiritual presence, but a presence that is not easy to see in the material elements of the world. The Christian ideas in the poem are present, but notice how subtly they are referenced. Christ's name is never specifically mentioned in the poem. I think that's enough background to get started. Now that you know something of the poem's cultural context and themes, I'd like you to discuss your own opinions of the poem with your classmates on the class discussion board on the class Blackboard page. You can find the forum by clicking on the collaboration link, which you can see here on the left-hand side of the main page of the class's Blackboard shell. Once you click the collaboration link, scroll down, and the Donne discussion forum will become visible. Thank you. Have a good day.